Going on with my read aloud series from the Indian Economic Development textbook for class 11, unit 3. So that's chapter 7, employment growth, informalization and other issues. So in this we're going to read growth and changing structure of employment. In chapters 2 and 3, you might have studied about the planning strategies in detail. Here we will look at two development indicators, growth of employment and GDP, gross domestic product. 60 years of planned development have been aimed at expansion of the economy through increase in national output and employment. During the period 1950 to 2010, gross domestic product (GDP) of India grew positively and was higher than the employment growth. However, there was always fluctuation in the growth of GDP. During this period, employment grew at the rate of not more than 2%. And this is exactly what the chart 7.3 points out. Let's see. It points out at another disheartening development in the late 1990s. So let me show the chart. So this chart shows the growth of employment and GDP 1951 to 2010. On the x-axis, we have the years given, and on the y-axis, we have the percentage. So let me just tell you that employment, it's in the chart you'll find out that the employment growth started declining. Now, okay, one more thing. So the dark line here is employment and the light one is the GDP. So what do you find? Look at this. It's going down and this is going high. This is going up. Okay, so employment growth started declining and reached the level of growth that India had in early stages of planning. So 1951, and what you have is in 2005-10. So you can see that what the growth rate here, as you can see, in 1951-56 during the first 5-year plan, and over the planning period it did come up and there was a slight dip in the employment, but look at 2005-10, it actually came to 0.28. The level of growth in employment actually came down what India had in the early stages of planning, it says. During these years, we find a widening gap between GDP and employment. Look at that. Look at the widening gap. Look at this. Can you see this? The gap is widening. Only this is the place where the gap was very narrow. So we also find a widening gap between the growth of GDP and employment. This means the Indian economy, without generating employment, we have been able to produce more goods and services. Scholars refer to this phenomenon as jobless growth. So far we have seen how employment has grown in comparison to GDP. Now it is necessary to know how the growth pattern of employment and GDP affected different sections of the workforce. From this we will also be able to understand what types of employment are generated in our country. Let us look at two indicators that we have seen in the preceding sections. Employment of people in various industries and their status. We know that India is an agrarian nation. A major section of population lives in rural areas and is dependent on agriculture as their main livelihood. Developmental strategies in many countries, including India, have aimed at reducing the proportion of people depending on agriculture. Distribution of workforce by industrial sectors shows substantial shift from farm work to non-farm work, as we'll see in the table. Let's study the table, and in this you find the trends in employment patterns sector-wise and status-wise, 1972 to 2010 in percentage. The items are given as primary, secondary, tertiary services, total, self-employed, regular salaried employees and casual wage laborers. So this is how it goes. So let's just take this. In 72-73 we find about 74% of workforce was engaged in the primary sector, and 2009-10 it declined to 53.2%, say 53%, let's round it out. The secondary and service sector are showing promising future for the Indian workforce. As you see, you can study that. You may notice that the shares of these sectors have increased, say from 10.9 in 72-73 to 21%, and in services from around 14, say 15 perhaps, to 25. So the distribution of workforce in the different status indicates that over the last 4 decades, that is 1972 to 2010, people have moved from self-employment and regular salaried employment to casual wage work. Yet self-employment continues to be the major employment provider. Scholars call this process of moving from self-employment and regular salaried employment to casual wage work as casualization of workforce. So this is casualization of workforce. This makes the workers highly vulnerable. How? Look at the case study of Ahmedabad in the preceding section. That's why we will see that later. So this is the box I'm going to read: informalization in Ahmedabad. So Ahmedabad is a prosperous city with its wealth based on the produce of more than 60 textile mills with a labor force of 150,000 workers employed in them. These workers had over the course of the century acquired a certain degree of income security. They had secure jobs with a living wage. They were covered by social security schemes protecting their health and old age. They had a strong trade union which not only represented them in disputes but also ran activities for the welfare of the workers and their families. In early 1980s, textile mills all over the country began to close down. In some places such as Mumbai, the mills closed down rapidly. In Ahmedabad, the process of closure was long drawn out and spread over 10 years. Over this period, approximately over 80,000 permanent workers and over 50,000 non-permanent workers lost their jobs and were driven to the informal sector. The city experienced an economic recession and public disturbances, especially communal riots. A whole class of workers was thrown back from the middle class into the informal sector, into poverty. There was widespread alcoholism and suicides. Children were withdrawn from school and sent to work. So this is a source from Renana Jhabwala, Ratna M. Sudarshan and Jimol Unni. Editorial: Informal Economy at Center Stage, New Structures of Employment, Sage Publications, New Delhi, 2003, page 265. And look at the picture that is shown here. Change, and the caption given is change in the balance of power in a house. An unemployed mill worker peeling garlic, whereas his wife has a new job of beedi rolling. So that's the sad state of affairs, and that is known as casualization of workforce. That is moving from self-employment and regular salaried employment to casual workforce.